Doing the pledge. Would you please stand and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and the United Republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to George W. Norris Legislative Chamber for the 61st day of the 106th Legislature, first session. Our chaplain today is Pastor Matt Erickson from the Mercy City Church here in Lincoln, guest of Senator Geist. Would you please rise?
Our Father in heaven, may your name be kept holy. May your kingdom come soon. May your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us today the food that we need, and forgive us our sins as we have forgiven those who sin against us. Don't let us yield to temptation, but rescue us from the evil one. Father, let the words of our mouths and the meditation of our hearts be in alignment with your word to us, having the boldness to keep your name in our mouths so that we would have the character to leave others' names out of our mouths. Let us be ambassadors of the kingdom of heaven here in Nebraska, seeing that your will be done in our great state, seeing you accomplish more for those that we have the privilege to speak for. And give us all we need, physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually, filling our lives so that we can work with those that we are called to rather than against them. Let us be people in a state that stand together in unity among brothers and sisters. Allow us the grace to have thick skin and soft hearts that we need to forgive quickly, not holding grudges, getting stuck in the muck of unforgiveness, but offering forgiveness, allowing us the opportunity to move forward on what matters most, the service of your people. God, grant us wisdom that only comes from you as we purpose in our hearts to be people that stand for what we stand for. In the mighty name of Jesus Christ, amen.
Thank you very much, Pastor Erickson. I call to order the 61st day of the 106th Legislature, first session. Senators, please record your presence. Roll call. Mr. Kirk, please record.
I have a quorum present, Mr. President.
Thank you. Any corrections for the journal?
I have no corrections.
Thank you. Any messages, reports, or announcements?
I have neither messages or reports nor announcements at this time, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. Senator Colderman would like to welcome Dr. Patrick Hotovy of York. He is serving as our family physician of the day. He's seated under the north balcony. Would you please stand and be recognized? Whenever you arrive. First item, Mr. Clerk.
Mr. President, Senator Vargas presented LB 550 yesterday. It's a bill for equity in wireless telecommunication services. It requires voter approval for taxes and fees on wireless services. He presented his bill. Committee amendments were presented by Senator Friesen of the Transportation Committee. Senator Vargas moved to amend those amendments. When the legislature adjourned for the day, Senator Wayne had pending a motion to bracket the bill until June 6 of 2019.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. I would note to the body that the queue was emptied last night at adjournment, so if you're wishing to speak, you will have to relight on the board. First, we'll go to Senator Vargas for a refresher on 550. I will then go to Senator Friesen for the committee amendment, and back to Senator, unless Senator Vargas can do both his amendment and the bill at the same time, would be great. And then I would run over to Senator Wayne for his bracket. Senator Vargas, you're recognized.
Thank you. And yes, I could do both those things at the same time. Very briefly, we were talking about LB 550. This bill is focused on trying to address our high cell phone taxes and prepaid wireless taxes that we're seeing in the form of occupation taxes. The original bill had many different cuts in it across the board and state and local, but what this does, the amendment, is only focus on a vote of the people for occupation taxes, and that would make it so that any existing occupation taxes would immediately not be in place and go to the vote of the people, and if they pass, then they would then be accepted and can be utilized by the municipality, and if not, then they wouldn't be able to use that occupation tax revenue. And again, this is in an effort to then rein in a very unique tax and to have some greater transparency and some greater accountability. I appreciate the conversation so far. I think that there is, some consensus on certain aspects. There's definitely some feedback on things that can be changed and concerns people have, which I welcome and I appreciate. But that is where we currently are, and that is the current amendment. That is the transportation and telecommunications is just that piece on the occupation tax. And then Amendment 1373 is essentially trying to clarify some of that language that we talked about yesterday. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Vargas. I'm looking for Senator Friesen. Is Senator Friesen on the floor this morning? Senator Friesen. Senator Friesen. Senator Friesen, would you please review the committee amendment, please?
Thank you, Mr. President. So what the committee amendment does basically is it just removes some of the other charges that were originally in the bill. It talks about eliminating the Prepaid Wireless Surcharge Act. It reduces or takes away when they tried to remove the telecommunications relay system, the E911 service, and the Nebraska Universal Service Fund. So it's a cleanup language to eliminate the removal of some of those other funds from cell phones and focuses it strictly on the occupation tax. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Friesen. And Senator Wayne, would you like to refresh us on your bracket motion?
Thank you, Mr. President. Colleagues, I just added an amendment that would, I think, help move this ball forward. I would ask everybody to look on their computers. It's for all new cell phone taxes would require a vote, so everything would stay the same. And with that, Mr. President, I withdraw my bracket motion.
Motion withdrawn. Returning to floor discussion. Senator Vargas, you're recognized.
Yes, thank you very much, Speaker. I'd like to withdraw in the effort for us to look at the amendment that Senator Wayne brought. I'd like to withdraw 1373.
AM 1373 is withdrawn. Mr. Clerk, for an amendment.
Mr. President, Senator Wayne would move to amend the committee amendments with AM 1393.
Senator Wayne, you're welcome to open on AM 1393.
Colleagues, thank you, Mr. President. Colleagues, if you could just take a second. I know last night there was a lot of negotiation going on for Senator Brewer's bill coming up. I know today we're starting to have a conversation about other agenda items and sidebar. But if you could take just a moment to listen to what we're trying to do here, I think it's very important. And why I say that is because many of in here are going to bring a bill and are going to vote for a bill regarding property tax relief. And I think it's imperative to understand how this all plays into property tax relief, in my opinion. Currently, you have many people who live outside of the cities who don't have the same occupation taxes that we do. And what I mean by that is, let's think about education here for a second. In the education community, you have a landowner who has thousands of acres who maybe only has 1 or 2 children going to school, but are disproportionately paying money on their thousands of acres to that school. While people who live in the city, if you go on a per acre basis, there might be multiple homes on that per acre who are actually filling that school, but are not paying the same amount in taxes to that school. There is an inherent flaw in no matter how we do property taxes when it comes to funding education, that dynamic will always be there. And what we are hearing this year in property tax relief coming out of revenue is that we are going to use an education funding source to reduce that. And that is fine and great, and I love to have that conversation. But what that still allows the folks who live in municipalities to have higher taxes. They have higher taxes because of these not voted for by the people occupation taxes. And these occupation taxes have caps on them, but at the end of the day, there are still multiple occupation taxes that don't get voted on by the people. Now, why is that important? Let's think about school funding, and that's my background on the Omaha Public School Board. And I was one of the ones who was president at the time who led the effort for the largest state bond in the state of Nebraska, $421 million. But when you talk about going over and above your regular budget, and this is very important, colleagues, when you talk about going over and above your regular budget, you take it to the vote of the people. And when it comes to building schools and bonds, there is a set time, a definite time in which that goes away, when those bonds are paid off. It just doesn't roll into the general fund. But when it comes to city occupation taxes, that's what happens. And even if there is a vote of the people, there's never a chance to roll it off. For example, in Omaha, we had a restaurant tax. That tax was supposed to go to our fire pension issues and a couple other things. And in fact, the current mayor ran on the idea of not using and repealing that restaurant tax. That's not the case anymore because it rolled into the general fund. So this tax is going to live on forever, although the voters never really believed it was going to live on forever. Now, this amendment is not all what Senator Vargas wants, but this amendment at least says, okay, we're going to hold you at your level for just cell phones. Read the amendment. It only applies for cell phones. We're going to hold you at your limit, and if you want to go any higher, let it be the vote of the people. Take it to the vote of the people. There is no current impact on any current budget because we're holding them harmless for what they have right now. But if you want to establish a new cell phone tax or increase a cell phone occupation tax, it requires a vote of the people. That is fair and balanced when you start thinking about what we're doing with property tax relief and those who live in municipalities. And it's going to be real hard pressed when this property tax debate comes out for me, when I'm disproportionately being taxed at a higher rate because of these occupation taxes. That farmers and those who are living out in rural, outside of municipality limits will get a significant a significant decrease in their property taxes, While, yes, I will get a decrease in my property taxes, but I'm also paying additional taxes in occupation taxes that they're not paying. This is a huge issue, and we're trying to balance between property tax in rural and farmers and some kind of tax that we're paying in the cities. And this isn't even a cut. I want to be clear. This is not a cut. This is saying going forward, you can't just increase cell phone taxes without a vote of the people. I think that's a reasonable compromise. I think we can continue to work on this bill as we move forward through the second round, but I think it's a conversation we have to have. And I'll end with this, colleagues. Senator Breezy brought a bill to lower land valuation for bonding. That affected schools and that affected areas where outside of municipalities, they are being hurt. Well, we're asking you, as urban senators in Omaha, who has some of the highest cell phone tax rate, let's make sure that we freeze where we're at so we don't continue to be hurt. And I guess the last thing, one more thing, everybody understands this is a regressive tax. And so if you support this tax on my side of the aisle, when it comes times to property tax relief and sales tax increases and those same regressive taxes, this transcript is going to get read because you can't have it both ways. We can't be against property tax relief for rural Nebraska and say we're okay with regressive taxes, but we're not okay with relief for the communities that I represent, the urban communities, the municipality communities, where we're having a tax snuck in through occupation taxes. It's the same thing with just two different sides of the coin. So with that, I would ask that you support this amendment, continue to have this conversation through second round, or through first round as we go into second round, and let's try to figure out taxes for everybody, both urban, rural, municipalities, and those who live just in the county, because we're dealing with the same issue regarding taxes. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Wayne. Going to floor discussion. Senator LeGrone, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise in support of AM 1393, and I think it really gets at the two of the key arguments against Senator Vargas' original bill, which I was in support of anyways. But the first being that the original bill would have had a massive impact on municipal budgets. The amendment would not. What the amendment says, as Senator Wayne laid out, is that your current taxes on cell phones can stay in place. You simply have to go to a vote for any increase upon that. And so this would have no impact on current municipal budgets. If they want to go get more from their citizens, yes, they would have to go to a vote. But this at least would keep those taxes in check while not impacting current municipal budgets. And the second is there is an argument against the cost of sending it to an election because of that cost of often having it in a special election. And I admit the cost of special elections are high. And that's why Senator Wayne aptly in his amendment has required it to be held at a state primary or general election. The reason for that is the cost of that election substantially decreases. Rather than an entire additional election, it's simply a line item on an already existing election. It's simply the cost of printing that additional line on the ballot rather than putting creating ballots simply for one election. So I want to thank Senator Wayne for bringing this amendment because I do think it addresses two of those key arguments against Senator Vargas' bill, and he can have the rest of my time should he like it.
Senator Wayne, you have 320 if you'd like it.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Senator LeGrone. I just got asked off the mic, so I want to be clear. This is not all occupation taxes, although I would like to do that. This is simply cell phone. We're talking one of the occupation taxes we are trying to limit. And the reason why that's important, colleagues, is because 80% of the generation between 18 to 35 have cell phones. This is an unfair tax in the urban or municipality areas. It doesn't apply anywhere else. So these are the kind of things that we are trying to balance when we talk about balancing the urban and rural divide. We talk about municipalities versus counties, is we're trying to level the playing field regarding taxes. But we understand that in the last 30 years, these occupation taxes had rolled into their general fund. Whether we agree with that or not, that isn't the issue. We're just saying moving forward on cell phones only, cell phone occupation tax only, there has to be a vote of the people. I think that is reasonable, and I think it accomplishes a couple things that many people have already spoke about. I do want to mention yesterday, there were some people who got on the mic talking about, well, my taxes aren't that high. They are high when you look at the other states, but just because you have the ability to pay that tax, while many people don't, doesn't make it any less harmful. And then colleagues, I need to tell you a story that happened yesterday. And those who, my staffer Jake was with me yesterday when this happened, and I just think it's important that you guys need to understand that this year has been a year that I've never seen so much racial things happen in this building. And maybe I was blind the first 2 years, but there were a group of fourth graders sitting over here on the north side of the balcony. They went downstairs. As I walked by, I said, oh, hey, where are you guys from? They told me where they were from. As we started to walk away, me and my LA Jake, they started to chant, build the wall. Fourth graders. So yesterday when I came back in here and got a little riled up, that was why. And their teacher stood there and said nothing.
1 minute.
So as we sit here and talk about things, it still goes on today. Has nothing to do with this bill, but I shared with one of my other colleagues what happened, and they said you need to make the body completely aware of it. And so I listened to her, and that's what I'm doing. But don't make a mistake that this stuff doesn't happen, because it does. So I wanted my colleagues to understand that, and just know that that still goes on. And with that, I'll yield the rest of my time back to the chair.
Thank you, Senator LeGrone and Senator Wayne. Colleagues, I want to reintroduce our physician of the day. He was busy helping one of us earlier when I announced. So Patrick Hodevy, Dr. Patrick Hodevy from York is located under the north balcony. If you'd please stand and be recognized. Thank you so much for your service. Returning to the queue, waiting to speak, Senator Blood, Williams, Groney, and others. Senator Blood, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I actually stand opposed even to the new amendment and the bill itself. I had originally not planned on speaking, but I have some real concerns. Everybody on this floor is concerned about property taxes. And we can tell pretty much who's in an election cycle because we hear more from people in an election cycle than we usually do on these issues. But the concern that I have coming from a municipality is that sometimes we get too big for our britches and we think it's our responsibility to tell municipalities how to run their government, their local governments. And although I understand that it is definitely our role to set statute and to set guidelines, what I'm concerned are about communities like Bellevue, like certain parts of Omaha, like Fremont. We have serious issues that pertain to the floods. Now, there is a big push this year to push a lot of bills through that involve caps and things going to the vote of the people. And again, I think it is good when people have the opportunity to vote. But let me talk, and I'm sure Senator Mosier can also speak on this issue. Senator Mosier, would you yield to a question?
Senator Mosier, would you please yield?
Yes, I would.
Senator Mosier, would you say it's common practice in a municipality to have 3 open meetings and a public hearing anytime there's a budget issue or a new ordinance that happens? That they can't just do it willy-nilly on their own, that it's got to be public?
Well,
Yes.
in the city, yes, I would say. Those were more.
All right, and in most municipalities, is the budget made public? I know in Bellevue, it's on their website, as is, I believe, Omaha and Papillion.
Oh, sure. Yeah, it's posted online, and
Okay.
people can look at it, although I think most people, if they have a complaint, like to talk to their council member or the mayor or somebody.
Well, sure. And so, because we like to handle our own. And it's my understanding Columbus also experienced flooding.
We had some flooding both north and south of town. In the city, we were pretty fortunate that the levee held, and so the majority of the damage was north or south of Columbus.
All right. Thank you, Senator Mosier. And so talking about the flooding, I can talk about Bellevue's flood in 2011, where it took almost 4 years for NEMA to reimburse us. for the work that we had to do in reference to the flooding. And if it weren't for the fact that we have an excellent finance person in Bellevue and that we had a community betterment fund we could draw a fund from and then repay, Bellevue would have been in a world of hurt. I think we have to be careful. We're all passionate about property tax, and there's a lot of good legislation that's going to be coming forward. But I think we're to the point where we're literally nickel and diming the municipalities and tying their arms. A lot of municipalities still haven't recovered from the last recession. And a lot of these things that we're nitpicking on are things that they were forced into because they lost state funding and federal funding during the last recession. And we said, you know what? You guys are on your own. You got to figure it out. And they did. They found creative ways to fund it. Do I necessarily agree with it? No. But I do know that it's all public information. I think we have to figure out what our big battles are and what our little battles are. And I don't think this is one of our big battles. I think what we're doing is we're making it really, really hard on municipalities this year. And this is just one example. And so we have to decide what's the true importance. And we can say, well, with Senator Wayne's amendment, the previous occupation tax is going to be left alone. Well, no, but we're still going to nickel and dime anything that they choose to do in the future. And we shouldn't take the place of the voters. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We shouldn't take the place of the voters. If they don't like how their local governments are being run, then they should do something different when they go to vote. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Senator Blood and Senator Mosier. Senator Williams, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President, and good morning, colleagues. And I appreciate all of the work that's been done by different people in working on this piece of legislation. I still have some concerns about it. The communities in my legislative district that have contacted me use these occupational taxes in a way which, in essence, offsets property tax and allocates those dollars to the people that are using those city services. A previous senator on the microphone talked about property taxes and those rural areas and those farmers that want property tax there. Well, I would tell you those that live in the small communities want property tax also on their homes in those communities. And the people that are paying the occupation tax on these cell phones in those communities are primarily the people that are using those city streets, and primarily the people that are using the water that's supplied by the city wells and the water system and the sewer system that's supplied by the city and the police protection provided by the city. So I would argue that it is a very fair tax and it does not increase the tax burden. My real concern underneath all of this is where we go and how we reach out as a legislature to tell communities how to do their business and require them to go to a public election for these kind of situations. First of all, in those communities, those city council members are elected to start with. They're elected. We have a representative form of government. We elect people, we give them responsibility, we hold them accountable, or we unelect them and elect somebody else. I think tying their hands to not be able to conduct business for the community the way they should makes no sense. We in this body are a representative form of government. We're elected by 38,000 constituents in our each legislative district. And we're given the responsibility to come here and make decisions. And we discuss, we debate, we hold hearings, and eventually we vote regularly on whether we're going to institute a new tax, increase a tax, lower a tax, create a fee here, lower a fee there. We do that regularly. We are not a form of government that every decision goes to a vote of the people. For small communities like Ansley, like Lexington, going to a vote of the people has a cost, a fairly significant cost, and it has time period constraints that reduce the ability to do business at the speed of business. So consequently, I appreciate significantly the work that's been done and Senator Wayne's amendment, narrowing and clarifying. I still struggle with the idea that occupation tax on landlines can be handled one way and occupation tax on wireless connections would be different. But I still remain unconvinced that LB 550 takes us in the right policy decision. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Williams. Senator Roney, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. I stand in full support of AM 1393, AM and then LB 550. A little history, you know, how things evolve. Occupation tax on phones had a common sense reason for that. Now, younger senators, believe it or not, in residential areas in the cities, there was telephone poles ran through your alley, ran down your street, and there was a service provided by the city to the phone companies. They allowed them access to put those phone poles up on those lines and ability to go down their alleys and fix it when the lines were down. That made sense that there was an occupation tax on phone service. That's not the same now with cell phones. There's very little infrastructure involved in a city that the city has to make way for. In fact, there's none. There's towers, which usually sit on private property, and there's a cable buried underground that runs it to a link, because most of I was told your phone service mostly is by cable. It goes to your tower, it runs all the way to Washington, D.C., it comes up at the closest tower to the phone, recognizes where the closest tower to the phone number you're calling, and it sends it out on the radio wave. There's absolutely no reason a city should have an occupation tax on your cell phone. This is not 1935, 1940, when all those telephone poles were throughout the city. That said, my city does not have an occupation tax on phones. They brought it up quite a few times in budget, but they've been shouted down. Personally, they ought to vote on it. So this will give my city the ability to put it on the ballot if they wish to. My major city. And as far as it's just not urban, folks. It's just, if you live around a city in a suburban area outside the city, and you have the zip code of part of that city, you live in a zip code that's part of the city, you're going to pay occupation tax on your phone bill, even though you don't live and you're not a citizen of the city, because that's how they do it. That's how they sort who the phone company does, by programs that identify the occupation tax by zip code. This tax needs to go away personally, and it needs to be voted on by the people. If the majority of people want to tax themselves, that's fine. I'm in full support of this. I was told by Senator Vargas there's 7 cities now that have an occupation tax on it, and it shocks me it's 6.25%. That's unbelievably high. Considering those cities already tax you their 1.5% sales tax, like on any other service that you receive from the gas company or whatever, it's 1.5%. So this is one of those things where government, times have changed, but the dinosaur exists. This occupation tax, as I said, goes back to the invention of the telephone and poles and lines running down your alley and across your front yard so you can get phone service. It needs to go away. Why don't we just give the cities a tax for existing, a human existence tax, and say put an occupation tax on that, because there's no reason for that tax any more there is than giving them an occupation tax on cell phone service. They provide no service. It creates no burden to the city. Cell phone infrastructure to that city. This is just a tax, period. In front and in back, in quotation marks. This is just a tax that has nothing to do with
1
your
minute.
income, your property you own, or services you receive. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Groney. Senator Merman, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm riding the fence on this bill right now. I'm kind of neutral, but I just wanted to speak a little bit about not so much the cell phone occupation taxes, but other occupation taxes in the city. It was mentioned earlier on the floor that occupation taxes are paid only by those in the city. I always looked at occupation taxes, at least some of the occupation taxes, as being a way for those outside the city to have the opportunity to pay taxes to the city. For instance, hotels, restaurants. I looked at that more for those that are from surrounding areas or distant areas from the city to come in and pay those taxes, and they would go towards city services. So, like I said, I'm neutral on the amendment, and I guess I do actually favor the amendment, but still neutral on the bill. And just wanted to point that out, that the different occupation taxes aren't just paid by those in the city. So thank you very much. I'd yield the rest of my time to Senator Wayne if he would want to, or to the chair.
Senator Wayne's not on the floor, so we will move to the next item. Next, Senator Chambers, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President, members of the legislature. A king famously said, "My kingdom for a horse." Were I a king and would make such a statement, mine would say, "My kingdom for nuanced thinking." As a legislative body, we're not going to go down the line and say because you are in favor of occupation taxes, you have to be in favor of all of them. Because you're in general against occupation taxes, you're against all of them. We winnow, we separate, we calculate, we determine whether or not under the circumstances that are presented to us, a problem exists. Is that action which is recommended designed to address that problem and solve it? And that's the way we should operate. I'm going to support this amendment. I'm not well liked by white people in Omaha or anywhere else. But you know why white people don't have to pay to have their garbage picked up? Decades ago, I brought legislation that said, and my rationale is this, property taxes are paid and collecting garbage is something that ought to be covered by the property taxes that are paid. The taxes ought to be for something. One judge, Oliver Wendell Holmes, said that taxes are what we pay for civilization. He also, Oliver Wendell Holmes Jr., he was the judge on the Supreme Court. He also said, the power to tax is not the power to destroy as long as the court sits. So by my having the vision, the foresight, and the concern for people in a city where I generally am hated, Omaha, because it's a metropolitan city, cannot levy a tax for garbage collection. This that is being discussed here goes beyond just the occupation tax that might be proposed for cell phones. I don't have a cell phone. I don't have any of those gadgets. I would be considered a dinosaur, but I will not be destroyed by the falling of a meteor or however people claim that dinosaurs were destroyed. If that happened, and there are dinosaurs, the reason you don't see them is because they've studied the way things are going now and have put themselves in a location where they'll survive if everybody else is wiped out. There are other bills that I'm not going to talk on in terms of the bills themselves, but there are subjects that I will discuss, especially pertaining to your stupid, idiotic president People have been touting a debate between me and Trump. He wouldn't have a chance, but he might because he can lie. And he's stupid. He is so stupid, people will excuse it as being a joke. When he found out that Notre Dame was on fire, he tweeted, "You must do something quickly," which they're already doing. You must use water, which they're doing. You ought to bomb the water bombs, which they're not doing. They pointed out that were they to drop that water bomb that Trump was talking about, it would completely level what is left of Notre Dame. And by the way, Trump misspelled Notre. He spelled it N-O-T-R-A, the way he hears it pronounced. And he constantly says that he is a smart man. So if it's brought to his attention that the water bombing would destroy the entire edifice, he would say, well, I knew that. I'm a smart man. You know why I said that? When the water bombs come and destroy everything and put it on the ground, you avoid the cost of demolition. See, now you don't have to pay to demolish it. It's all demolished, and that water will even carry away some of the debris. He doesn't realize that they intend to rebuild it. But that's you all's president. Senator Wayne touched briefly and gently on how children are dealt with at the lower grades in schools. So I will have things to say today, but not directly on this bill. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Chambers. Senator Mosier, you're recognized.
Good morning, colleagues. Thank you, Mr. President. Good morning, Nebraska. Some people evidently don't have enough to do, so they watch what we do here. This amendment, I don't think, addresses the problem that the original bill was intended to address. The original premise was cell phone taxes are too high, and this would just limit them from increasing. And in the case of some of the larger cities, they're already at their maximum, so they're already limited from going up. As far as city people using cell phones more than rural people, I would say most rural people and city people have cell phones, so I don't think that that's necessarily a reason to vote for this amendment. I think this amendment is a symbolic gesture, and I just don't think it addresses the original problem. And like Senator Williams was talking about, government has to balance taxation and spending, and it's an ongoing battle. Nobody likes paying tax, any tax. And if you voted on any tax one at a time, I would say most of those taxes would fail. There are already limits on occupation taxes, and in my opinion, those are sufficient. Occupation taxes go into the general fund of most of the first-class cities, which are the cities that, types of cities that are in my district. And those funds are spent from the general fund on parks, library, police, fire, both city and rural fire, rescue, both city and rural. And the support of the general fund is 50% by property tax, roughly, a little less than 50%. Occupation tax is $700,000 out of 11 million, so you can divide that out, whatever that is, 6 or 7%. And if you take those occupation taxes out, and I'm speaking just in a symbolic way because evidently that's how we're talking here, we're talking about symbolism, then it's going to increase property taxes. There aren't any other taxes to offset that loss of those occupation taxes. And I'd much rather pay a user tax like an occupation tax than I would property tax. And in the grand scope of property taxes, I come from primarily a rural district. We do have a couple of larger cities, or one larger city and several medium-sized ones. And property taxes are too high for everybody. If you have a $150,000 house, your taxes are $3,000 a year, your property taxes. And you divide that out, and you're paying $250 a month of your house payment to property tax. And if you pay off that house, your mortgage payment will stop, but your property tax bill goes on forever. You can't beat it. And so we need to have a plan to address property taxes for the city dwellers and for the rural property taxpayers. So again, I think, you know, I admire their animus for wanting to stick up for their district, but I just don't think this accomplishes anything, and I think it has a potential of a lot of collateral damage. So I'm still against the amendment. I'm still against the original bill. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Mosier. Senator Moorfield, you're recognized.
Thank you, colleagues. This is probably the last time that I'll speak on this legislation. I remain opposed to the underlying bill, and I remain opposed to the amendment for the following reasons. First, it's really a statement of the reasons why I was opposed to it yesterday. I believe that this is the province of a represented, elected local body to make these decisions how they see fit and be accountable to their voters. That is a representative democracy. To be able to make decisions in the best interest of your community after weighing all the factors and then facing your community at the ballot box and having to answer for your decisions. The status quo is not a problem in my view. In addition, I have concerns with the prospective aspect of this in many different respects, because that's only kicking the problem in the can down the road, in the sense of what happens if there's a flood in your community and you have to raise revenue. So are you going to have a special election then to be able to increase the taxes here? Are you going to wait another 2 years potentially for the next election? In addition, I also think that this punishes communities that currently have a very low tax in this regard and want to provide a small incremental increase to be able to raise revenue for things that are priorities in their communities. In addition, I'm not quite sure exactly where the funding is going to come from to offset the loss in funding here. And for the city of Lincoln, it's $4 million out of, I believe, a $178 million general fund budget. That $4 million is likely going to come from property tax. You want to know why? Because we'll pass this bill, and then the cities are going to have to wake up the next day and still realize that they're going to have to turn on the lights, provide for roads and public safety, provide for other amenities such as parks and libraries. This bill, in my opinion, is unnecessary. It encroaches over the prerogative of these local communities to be able to run their communities and be able to raise revenue as they see fit. We have a process. It is open. It is transparent. There has to be a public hearing. There has to be a vote. If the people are upset about it, they can either vote against their council member or their mayor who proposed it, or they can collect enough signatures and put an initiative on the next city election ballot. It is open, it is transparent, it is something that the citizens can take action on currently, and I believe that it's dangerous policy to start chipping away at the prerogative of local governments to be able to raise revenue how they see fit and be accountable to the people in their district. In addition, I also think that it hamstrings communities that need to react to either opportunities or catastrophes. It makes it harder for them to be able to react to that and harder for them to be able to raise the necessary revenue to be able to support and sustain their community. And that's why I remain opposed to the bill and opposed to the amendment. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Moorfield. Senator McAllister, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good morning, colleagues. You may recall that Senator Kavanaugh and I have had an ongoing discussion about rape kits. Well, you just received an editorial from the Lincoln Journal-Star that shows that we are indeed making progress. Let's talk about LB 550. The initial bill, I thought, was deficient, and I'm not sure we're there quite yet. There's absolutely no question that cell phone taxes in this state are just too high. But as you look at the components of a cell phone tax, the occupation tax is not the egregious tax. I would contend that the egregious tax has to do with the Universal Service Fund. That's the high component in a cell tax bill. And the original bill also was precipitous in that it would, automatically take those occupation taxes off for cell phones. And, for Omaha, that was in excess of $5 million, and that's too deep a hole to come out all at once, even for Omaha that has a fairly large budget. Occupation taxes aren't altogether bad. You know, they're aimed primarily at visitors that come into the city. That would include rental cars, meals, hotel bills, and that's it's always nice when you can have visitors pay your taxes. Finally, City Council is the right place to deal with these occupation taxes. Yes, we could institute a supermajority, something of that nature, and I think that would be preferable over a vote of the citizens that costs money and perhaps would be too hard to achieve or doesn't give a city as much control as they should have. With that, Mr. President, thank you very much. I yield the balance of my time to the chair.
Thank you, Senator McAllister. Senator Quick, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. I haven't spoken on this bill yet, and I felt I needed to get up and talk about the city of Grand Island a little bit. I appreciate what Senator Vargas is trying to do. I'm not sure I can totally be on board with this bill. You know, Grand Island is, they've gone through their growing pains. They became a metropolitan statistical area here a few years back. They hit 50,000, and along with that came growing pains. And they've had more, you know, and as the infrastructure ages, they had to do more work for repairs and needs for new roads as they grow, and also for sewer systems and things like that. So also there's been a growing need for more public safety. And that's been tough because those funds also come out of the general fund budget. And then there's also all the other services that the city provides for our citizens. I know a few years back, because of the budget was suffering and they were finding it hard to keep up, they put on the ballot, or asked to be put on the ballot, a half-cent sales tax. And that was put before the voters. And it was done the right way, but the citizens turned that down. They voted it down. So the city council was left with an option probably either to raise the mill levy, or what they did was they put in on a wheel tax to provide with some funds to deal with some of the infrastructure needs that they had. They did put the half-cent sales tax back on the ballot. I think citizens were upset with the wheel tax, and the half-cent sales tax did pass. So the increase did pass, and then the wheel tax will sunset. So that will come back off. So the city of Grand Island has done a good job of trying to provide the citizens of Grand Island with all of their needs for public safety and infrastructure needs, and tried to stay within their budget. They've done a great job of that. I know I've talked with Roger Steele. He's the mayor of Grand Island currently, and I'm going to read from his email what they're doing with the occupation tax right now, currently for the wireless telephone providers. He said, in anticipation of the revenues derived from this tax, the city issued its general revenue bonds, the proceeds of which are being used to pay for construction of a new and soon-to-be completed emergency management 911 call center, and a new fire truck and an apparatus. Loss of this revenue source would negatively impact the city's upcoming budget and would shift bond payments to other sources of revenue, such as property tax or sales tax. And so I think that just shows the need that Grand Island has for that occupation tax, and that they're spending those dollars wisely on things that they need. And I think if we would pass this with the amendment, what I could see and what I'm afraid of is that other industries or whatever that that have to collect the occupation tax may ask for the same thing. And where do we draw the line? Do we say that we only do it for cell phone providers, or do we allow everyone to, do we allow every industry to be limited in how much we can collect from occupation tax? I think what we do is we rely on our local governments to do what they're supposed to do. And I think for the most part, they do a good job. They stay within their budgets. They provide for their citizens. With that, thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Quick. Senator Friesen, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. So this amendment does make quite a change to the bill. When I was, at first when we first started talking about occupation taxes on cell phones, I thought there was probably only 5 or 6 communities that even had the occupation tax on cell phones, and obviously there's a lot more. And as I listened to the debate, and I've been on a city council, I've been a mayor before, I'm torn between that local control that the legislature passes down to us to be able to use, and at the same time being able to sometimes rein in taxes that are more hidden or more not necessarily hidden. These are usually line itemed on your bill, but people don't pay attention to them. And so I don't know quite where I stand on this yet. I look at what the legislature in the past has done, and we have removed a lot of state aid to schools, or the schools, to communities, to counties. We have changed how we fund them. We have made them more self-reliant on funding. Cities still have the ability to go after lots of different versions of taxes. They have wheel taxes, occupation taxes, franchise fees, and you can go down a long list. Counties are much more restricted. They're pretty reliant on property taxes. But again, I'm conflicted with, do we take away that local control? I don't know quite where I stand. Senator Vargas, would you yield to a question?
Senator Vargas, would you please yield?
Yes, I would.
So your initial goal was obviously to have a vote of the people on whether or not even these occupation taxes exist on wireless. Is that correct?
It included a lot of different provisions, cuts on taxes, but one of them was a vote of the people on occupation taxes. So on wireless, yeah.
And so when and there's numerous other occupation taxes out there, aren't there? You know how many of you counted how many different occupation taxes there are? Do you know how many different occupation taxes there are?
I couldn't tell you the number, but there are many different other types of occupation taxes, yes.
Okay, so when we look at different things, and I go back to when we allowed Gage County to, it's been brought up here numerous times to, we decided that it should not be a vote of the people because we realized that certain segments are always taxed at different levels, correct?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not trying to tie it to this. I think that was a separate issue that's only going to happen once in a lifetime, we hope. So what does this do to further your goal of where you wanted to be in the original bill?
So one, I'm going to clarify. It's not just my goal. This has been carried on for a decade now from previous senators trying to focus on trying to lower and provide more accountability in occupation taxes. But the original goal is to figure out a way for there to be more accountability on occupation taxes on wireless services, and then also try to figure out a way to curb this being utilized and overused as an additional source that has gotten it to the place where it is a really large effective cell phone tax rate on people's bills.
You've been a strong supporter of the small cell bill in the past.
I have been on the other side and have been on the proponent side of the small cell bill.
How do you think this affects anything that we're trying to accomplish with the small cell bill?
I don't think it affects it at all.
Have you read the amendment to the small cell bill?
Yes.
Okay, thank you, Senator Vargas. Again, it goes back to we have, I'm not going to say which way I'm going to vote on this yet. I really don't know. It goes back to the local control, and should they have that local control, we've obviously given it to them in the past for a reason. I imagine there were negotiations in previous bodies that when they lost some of the state aid to cities, that these were some of the compromises that were made. Wasn't here. I guess that's just a warning for us going forward when we pass things here. We do not tie bodies to decisions we make. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Friesen. Senator Vargas. Senator Arch, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. When I first became aware of this bill, one of my larger concerns was the issue of transparency. And do we have transparency in the fees, the sales taxes, all these things that are being charged? So I went back to my own bill and pulled an example from a month, and I went down. I frankly had never really looked at all of these individual charges, but they're all itemized, from an administrative charge to the federal universal service to some occupation, business and occupation, to the Nebraska universal service, to a regulatory charge. That's in the area of surcharges, according to my bill. And then you move into government taxes and fees with city sales tax, state 911 tax, other state sales taxes, and a variety of other things, all adding up. And when I went back and calculated where our the occupation taxes that I pay on my bill fall as far as a percentage, it was about 5.5% of the total. So about 94.5% of the total of this is involved in other things that the state has deemed fit to apply to a cell phone charge. I guess my point to that is, that being said, with the itemization here, it's pretty apparent where these fees are going, where I would take my grievance if I felt as though that something needed to be addressed on this list of things as too high, as unfair, whatever it might be. And I go back to the comments that have been made on the floor regarding the local control, regarding the ability of our citizens, of the taxpayers, to address to those government officials where they have the issue, specific in this case to an occupation tax from a city, to take it to those officials because I have the information to do that. And that being said, with the city empowered, the local municipalities empowered with these occupation taxes, with transparency in place, I agree with the comments that we need to be very careful in the chipping away of the authority of the municipalities. And while we as a state sit here with the majority of the issues and the majority of the costs that would be added on to a cell phone bill. That being said, that underlying issue of the authority of the municipality, the local control, the ability of the citizens to address their grievances and the taxes and the fees paid is what continues to give me concern. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Mosier. All right, Senator Arch. Senator Hilkelman, you're recognized.
Good morning. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise again, talk about this bill. There's not a one of us likes to pay taxes. And I don't like paying occupation taxes. I don't like paying, as I said yesterday, the property tax or the income tax, but it's part of what we have to do to run an organized society, have the services that we need within our cities, and I'm concerned, and as I said to Senator Vargas yesterday, I apologized to him because when he first came to this, I look at my cell phone bill and I think, this is awful. All the taxes that are on here, the occupation, the universal service fee, the sales tax on that. It just adds up. And I said, yeah, I don't like that tax. And the more I've thought about it, certainly listening to this debate, if we start having an election for every time that we have a tax, we're going to change it or whether we're going to apply it, we're going to have a hard time running government because given the choice, if you're given the choice in the ballot box and you say, do you really want to pay income tax? Do you really want to pay property tax? Do you want to pay an occupation tax? I'd have to say, I'm going to say, no, I don't. I'll be honest with you. But at the same time, I want to come down to Lincoln every day on a road that's a good road. I want to have these services. I want these, and they cost money, folks. And our cities this is just a part. I think maybe the city of Omaha's is maybe a little higher than it could be, but it is. That's what it is. I've done certainly traveling around the country. I go to Houston a lot with having 2 daughters down there. And when you get done paying a rental car fee in Houston, Texas, you're $25 a day that they tell you to car. That's the cheap part about it. By the time you get done paying all the taxes they add onto your car down in Houston, Texas, you're looking at about $60 a day for a $25 a day car because of all the different fees. And so as was mentioned here earlier, this is a way that we do get some revenue sources with these occupation taxes coming in, probably not the cell phone bill specifically, but at either rate, I think that if we're going to keep an organized society, we can't be having every situation in a representative government. Let's have a vote on this. Let's take it to a vote. Let's take it to a vote. We are here as public officials. People trust us to make the decisions. I don't like standing up here saying that I'm supporting a tax that I don't particularly care for, that I don't like to pay. But at the same time, I'm going to do that because I think this is one of those situations where we need to keep this in place, and I'm not in favor of getting rid of this particular, putting it on the ballot because, again, I think it's one of those things. Given the choice, people say no. It's the common thing. This is April 17th. Some of you may have had the day of reckoning, as I did on April 15th, where you hadn't put in quite enough. You had to write that check. I don't like to write that check, but you have to write it. It's part of being part of our society. And I certainly don't agree with how every dollar is spent statewide. Don't agree with how every dollar is spent federally. But I'm glad that we have a national defense that protects us. I'm glad that we have an interstate highway system that we can enjoy. This is part of being part of an organized society. We have to depend upon our public servants to do the best with the dollars that they are given. They need to be accountable. If there's not an accountability on this, I think that that's something that we can address, and I know that that's what a little bit the intent Senator Vargas had, was to make this more accountable. But then we probably need to be accountable on every dime that we have here, and I think we are. I think we do, as being a member of the Appropriations Committee. I think we work very hard on every appropriation. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Senator Hilkelman. Senator Mosier, recognized.
Thank you. I'm going to be brief. The state has cut aid to cities and put a squeeze on the budgets of cities in Nebraska in the last couple of decades. They cut roads aid, they cut any number of revenue sources because the state had problems with their own budget, and that's put a squeeze on the cities. And then to come in and try to interfere with their ability to use what taxation that they can use to support their needs to run the city, police, fire, rescue, parks, library, all those things, is just wrong, I think. I think we should quit trying to be the big brother to the cities and let them quit telling them how to govern the city. There's transparency between the more local you go, the more citizen and elected official interface there is. They can talk to their city council member, they can talk to their mayors anytime. I had people walk in my business while I was trying to sell something, and they'd start talking about potholes or drainage or whatever was on their mind. So there's plenty of opportunity for those citizens to affect how their elected officials govern. I think that Senator Moorfeld's comment along those lines was right on. That we put the squeeze on them, and now we're trying to tell them further how to operate. I think it's kind of myopic for us to look at them and see what their problems are when we certainly have enough problems of our own to solve. I don't think we need to be picking fights with the cities. I think we've got budget problems looming. We have issues that need more money that we don't have. So I think we've got our own problems. I think we should stay out of the city's business and just do our own. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Mosier. Senator Blood, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think, again, I stand in opposition to Senator Wayne's amendment and the bill as a whole. I think it's very telling when we have so many people that have been engaged at the municipal level stand and speak on this mic today to say this is not a good thing for municipalities. And this is not a good thing for municipalities because nobody knows how to run the local government better than the people that run that government. Now, we have different types of ways that we run municipalities across Nebraska. Some have strong mayor systems like Omaha, others have weak mayor systems like Bellevue and Papillion, and I speak always about Sarpy County because that's what I know best. And I think if you look across the state of Nebraska that you'll find that most municipalities are run with weak mayor systems. And so what that means is that it really gives the people a strong voice because those people elect their city council members and they have those city council members there to be their voice. And I can talk from personal experience as a city council person that most people that take the job seriously, they are in the community and they're trying to find out what's important to their constituents. And I know what's important in Bellevue right now is we're rebuilding from the flood. I don't understand why state government feels that it needs to provide overreach when it comes to this topic. I understand we have senators in election cycles, and I do respect that because I as well am in an election cycle. But we cannot continue through legislation to tie the hands of these municipalities. We say we're doing this because the property tax is too high, taxes are too high, and yes, they most certainly are too high. I agree. So we say, well, they need to tighten their belts and they need to be more efficient. Well, I can tell you that the city of Bellevue is very efficient with its funds. In fact, we recently got a AAA rating because we have such an awesome finance director. But I can tell you when I came to the council back in 2008 that we were $10 million in the hole and had no rainy day fund. Again, no rainy day fund. We talked a little bit about the last recession, how the state and the federal government took a lot of the funding that the municipalities were dependent on. And we said, you know what, you guys need to figure it out. And so there were creative ways that people generated funding, like occupation tax. But none of it was done behind a closed door. All of it was done in public view. All of it was done through multiple public meetings. All budgets are public information. It's not like municipalities are trying to pull a fast one. And one of the reasons, to be really frank, that Bellevue struggles is because there have been things that have been brought up on the agenda, on the ballot that got voted down. And so Bellevue became a sink or swim municipality and had to struggle. And I know that La Vista has had serious issues when it comes to economic development and certain programs that came from the state, and had their hands tied in many ways when it came to their budget, when they were just trying to move their city forward. I think when we stand at the mic and we say, I'm against all taxes, or sometimes I hear taxes is theft, I really question how you expect municipalities especially, and counties, to do what they need to do. How do they plow their streets? How do they provide first responders with the equipment that they need? How do they maintain their parks?
1 minute.
There is no magic money pot. And the more we tie our municipalities' hands and our counties' hands, the harder we're going to make it on them. And though we may think that we are leaving taxation on the residents in these communities, but what you're doing is you're creating a harder issue that needs to be resolved at the local level, and that's going to result in just basically shifting taxes elsewhere. So I think we can do better than this, and I think there are other resolutions to resolve this. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Senator Blood. Senator Hilkelman, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thought I'd just share, I mentioned Houston because I have to go down there a lot with my daughters there. And first time I rented a car when we flew in, I thought, well, we'll save the kids having to pick us up and so forth. And we did that one time after having to pay all the taxes that they had on that car. And one of the taxes that they had on that was a Houston athletic tax or whatever else like that. And I said to my son-in-law, and I said, well, tell me, because I went through the itemization, and he had what each one of those particular things was, and one of them was for the Houston Astrodome. Now, if you're familiar with the Astrodome, that was the first enclosed stadium. And that's why we call AstroTurf, because they built it, originally they built that building, and they put actually natural grass on it. And if you remember, there wasn't enough light came into it to keep the grass going, and so they had this problem. They had this field to play baseball on and no grass. And so that's why we call AstroTurf, because they ended up having to make this carpet for the Houston. Well, to make a long story short, they haven't used the Astrodome for a number of years. They built a new stadium because the Astrodome, but they're still, so I said to John, I said, well, what are they going to do with it? And he said, well, we can't take it down until we get it paid for, and we can't get it paid for until we get, it's like a 40 years more left on that Astrodome tax that you paid on. So this is how cities do business, folks, and we just have to, I'm certain the people in Harris County would love to get rid of that particular tax. They're finally, one of the things they've just done now with the Astrodome is they're going to possibly turn it into a parking lot. They're actually going to put a little business, like a walk-through flea market type of a situation with it. So this is part of governments make decisions. Sometimes those decisions are good, turn out to be very, very good decisions. In the case of the Astrodome, it turned out not being exactly what they wanted, but it was the first experience that they had with an indoor type of stadium. We're certainly doing our indoor stadiums better now. They're putting, they've got a dome now on the one that they built in Houston that they can cover it sometimes. They can take that turf away. But these are all decisions that are made. I think that those people who made that decision to build that 50 years ago were well-intentioned. But all of our city officials, our county officials, I think for the most part, I think the people here, we're all very cognizant of trying to do what's best for the people of the state. Sometimes you take risks, sometimes those risks work out well, sometimes they don't. And there is a cost to these decisions. I'm aware of that. But at either rate, so Senator Moser, you made some comments about your being the mayor of your city. We've had other people. these are all, and I appreciate that, because we have to, there's just a certain amount of pot of revenue that comes in. No one likes to pay a tax of any kind. And I'm certainly one that complains about them a lot. So how do we deal with that? Well, how I've done it, I don't like that tax in Houston, so what I do now is we don't necessarily like to bother our kids, so we take the Uber, so we don't have to pay 5 days of $28 in taxes for parking fees and everything else when you're not even parking the car at the airport. But this is how cities have tried to take their and revenue. That's part of what occupation tax is, and I will continue to be opposed to this bill. Appreciate the spirit with which it's referenced, but thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Senator Hilgelman. Senator Crawford, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good morning, colleagues. I've not stood up to speak yet on this bill. I rise with concerns, and my concerns echo many of those that have been spoken by Senator Blood, Senator Williams, Senator Mosier, concerns about what we do as a state in terms of determining where the line is in terms of where local control is critical and where we say, no, this is something the state needs to step in and take away local control. We currently, as I understand it, on these taxes, allow cities to go up to 6.25, and we've decided that anything above that is something where the city would need to get a vote of the people. But we give cities that flexibility to go up to that 6.25 to take care of situations they may have in their city. My city, Bellevue, is already up at that limit, so for them to do anything more, they would have to go to a vote of the people because they're hitting that limit. And that's where we've decided in the past to draw that line is at 6.25. And I think that makes some sense. We've done that. We've made that kind of compromise on some other occupational taxes as well, where we say, okay, we'll allow flexibility under a certain line, and then above that line, we're going to say this is a place where you probably ought to go ahead and get a vote of the people. I don't know if I even agree with the vote of the people at that point, but I think that's at least has been a reasonable compromise that we've done in the past, is decide where that line is. And at this point, we do have a line to 6.25, and then above that line, people are going to have to get a vote of the people. So it's not an unlimited amount that cities can spend. It's not an unlimited amount of taxing authority for cities. It's just up to that 6.25 line. And the other thing I wanted to address, we had some conversation yesterday asking, now how can all of the other cities and other states get by without this occupational tax, and why do we need it in Nebraska? And again, to echo some of what Senator Blood has already discussed, one of the issues that we have here in Nebraska is that we had city aid, state aid to cities, and that was in part to help them keep the property taxes down, and that state aid to cities helped them address some of their needs, and then that state aid to cities was pulled. And when that was pulled, that left the cities in a place of looking at other sources for revenue. And so, again, part of the reason that cities rely on occupational taxes is in part because they don't have state aid to cities to help balance those revenue needs. The other issue I would just raise in terms of transparency is we do currently have Senator McDonald's bill. And Senator McDonald's bill is one that will require cities to be very transparent about how they're spending these occupational taxes, and have public hearing, public statement on how they're spending the occupational taxes, and so that the voters then will know, and they'll know how to hold their elected officials accountable even more strongly than they can now. Now, if people are upset about the occupational tax, they can vote out the elected leaders that are imposing that or retaining that tax. And now with Senator McDonald's bill, they're going to have more information about whether this occupational tax is a good tax or not, whether they agree with how the tax is being used or not. And Senator McDonald's bill also asks cities to indicate how long they intend to keep this occupational tax in place. So if it's the case, again, my city is already at its limit, but one of the other smaller cities that isn't at its limit that decides to increase an occupational tax tax in the city to deal with some issues with the flood or some other emergency, they could very well decide they're going to impose it. Thank you, Mr. President, just for a couple of years or until the flooding damage is repaired. And that will be very transparent now with Senator McDonald's bill. It makes sure that the city is required to indicate why they're issuing the occupational tax, how long it's going to last, and citizens will get a chance to really see that in a way that they have not been able to see that in the past. And that will help them hold their elected officials accountable even more, which again I think is the most appropriate way for us to handle accountability in this case, is making sure that we're holding the elected officials accountable for their choices on the occupational tax. And so Senator McDonald's bill helps us to help citizens do that even better. And so I'm even more confident in the citizens' ability to do that, given that they're going to have new information and more clear information about what's going on with occupational taxes in their city. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Crawford. Senator Colderman, you're recognized.
Good morning, colleagues. Thank you very much, Mr. President. I'd just like to make a couple of comments. I have not talked on this bill as well. I appreciate Senator Vargas bringing it, and I think we've had tremendous opportunity to discuss this. You know, my two largest communities, I've heard from them as well as some of the smaller communities in my district. They all have occupation taxes, and they use it to balance their budgets, much like you've heard throughout the last couple of days from Columbus all the way to Gothenburg. And I believe we need to let the city officials and the county officials do their jobs. As I said, I really appreciate Senator Vargas bringing this bill, and yet I can't support it. So with that, I just wanted to get on the record that my communities oppose this as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Colterman. Speaker Scheer, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. We've met the allotted time on this bill. We'll move forward to the next item, please.
Thank you, Speaker Scheer. Items, Mr. Clerk?
Just one, Mr. President. Thank you. Senator Wayne would like to put an amendment to LB 85. That's all that I have.
Returning to Senator priority bills on general file, LB 155.
Mr. President, 155, bill by Senator Brewer, is a bill for equity and privately developed renewable energy generation facilities. It eliminates provision relating to eminent domain, introduced on January 11, referred to the Natural Resources Committee. The bill was discussed by the legislature on February 27th. At this time, Mr. President, I do have an amendment to the bill by Senator Brewer, AM 1380.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. Senator Brewer, you're recognized to open on LB 155.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good morning, colleagues. I would like to start off by saying thanks to Senator Rob Clements for using his priority to reprioritize my priority bill. I cannot find any time in recent history that's ever happened. But for the representatives of my district, you will always hold a special place in our hearts because you gave life again to 155. So today we're going to start by understanding how did 155 come about. And 155 came about as a result of LB 824. You're probably all scratching your heads because there's only a handful that were here when LB 824 came into existence. And I think to understand some of the challenges that came as a result of 824, we have to go back and review what happened. To do that, I have to go to some of those that are a little longer in the tooth that were there for 824. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to read a quote, and then I'm hoping that the senator who quoted this will remember that he said these very words. He said, "I voted to advance LB 824 out of committee with the language that was stripped out.
Senator Harr's amendment, AM 2720, and that's the only reason that I voted to send it out. I would not have supported this bill, and I would not support this bill if it is attached, and it is, and if this is how we want to conduct business here, waiting to the second round for select file to put in a large amendment that is complicated and have a huge impact for Nebraska and its public power, then we'll start a whole new game here today. That was 7 April 2016. Senator Friesen, can you help us to better understand exactly what was transpiring? You were part of the committee, is that correct? Well, I'd like to yield a question to Senator
Friesen, would you yield?
Yes, I would.
Could you give us a little bit of background on 824 so people understand what transpired that day?
As to how the process worked or what we were talking about on the bill?
Well, let's start by that quote about how 824 came into existence. We need to kind of understand that first.
Okay. Well, I mean, obviously that portion had been held in committee, and then it was stripped out of the bill. We moved the bill forward with language in there on a different item that we wanted to bring forward. And so it got sent out of the committee without that portion in it, and then it ended up getting pulled from the floor and attached to that bill.
All right, and then do you remember what 824 did that caused the heartache?
Well, when you looked at 824, and part of the heartache was that when a private developer of a wind generation facility, if you wanted to build a transmission line or a feeder line to like a major transmission line, there would be homeowners or property owners who would not be getting any compensation from wind generation facilities, but they would have to cross their property to get to that major transmission line. And so there, if the private developer would basically ask NPPD to build the power line, then NPPD could use their ability of eminent domain to force those property owners to accept that transmission line to reach the distribution line.
So you could use the power of government, the power of eminent domain, to use for-profit private power to cross someone's land, and that bill would allow that to happen.
Yes.
All right, thank you. So consequently, that power became an issue that folks came to me and said, listen, we no longer have the option of being able to go through the courthouse. That door is closed to us, and we don't think this is fair. We should be able to, and it should be negotiated, whether or not someone is going to lose their property rights over a decision made by another person who's making a profit. This is a very big issue in my district, and that's why it had become my priority bill. And as we looked at options, the original 155 was what we had determined was the right answer, because it changed nothing with public power. If NPPD, OPPD, whoever needs to do like we have done in Ainsworth, where we have a wind farm there, that is owned by NPPD. They have all the right to right-of-ways there, and that's for the public good. The issue comes in with private power, for profit, because those power lines, those roads now can be built across someone's property, as Senator Friesen was saying, and that person is going to have them use that public power right of eminent domain to cross their property. Part of the idea is that you negotiate. You don't build it and then try and get permission to cross, that there is a discussion between landowners and companies to make sure that what they're trying to do is fair and right. But through the discussion on 155, there were issues that I think we're fair in the discussion. And because of that, several senators, Senator Pansy Brooks and Senator DeBoer, came to me, and we have an amendment which is AM 1380. And AM 1380, and it's fairly short, so I'll read it real quick. It specifies more description, especially on the issue of the sandhills, that I think is critical because that is a unique part of Nebraska. So starting on line 5, and this is on the amendment AM 1380, the legislature finds that Nebraska has the authority as a sovereign state to protect its land, natural resources, cultural resources for economic and aesthetic purposes for the benefit of its residents and future generations by regulation of energy generation projects. The unique terrain and ecological parts of Nebraska, to include the Sandhills, provide irreplaceable habitat for millions of migratory birds and other wildlife every year, and serve as the home for numerous ranchers and farmers. The grasslands of the Nebraska Sandhills and other natural terrain in Nebraska will become increasingly valuable, both economically and strategically, as the demand for food and energy increases. The Nebraska Sandhills are the home to priceless archaeological sites of history and cultural significance. The other part that's being added to the law here on page 4, line 11, reads that there is a rebuttable presumption that the exercise of eminent domain to provide needed transmission lines. So now we have a way of getting into that courthouse to have the discussion on whether or not a project is necessary and fair and how it's being
One
planned.
minute.
So what I am going to ask today is that we have a limited discussion on this. If you have an issue, I'm more than happy to answer questions or address issues. But I think the compromise is just that. It's a way of being able to address the issue without having it become so demanding that we're not going to be able to come to a resolution that's acceptable. So with that, I thank the folks of the district that have been here for 3 days waiting for this bill to come up. Your patience is amazing. And Mr. President, with that, we'll close, and we'll include the AM 1380 in that opening, so we won't need to do that as a separate.
Thank you, Senator Brewer. Senator Breezy would like to introduce 16 fourth graders from the Elgin Public Schools in Elgin, seated in the north balcony. If you would please stand and be recognized by your Nebraska legislature. We will now proceed to debate on AM 1380 and the underlying bill, LB 155. Senator Pansy Brooks, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm standing to thank Senator Brewer, and I appreciate his hard work on working to find a compromise. I know that he's not totally satisfied with where it went, but it is better, and we've worked together to make it stronger. And again, I believe it's language that makes it stronger for landowners as well as those who want to consider having a wind business in Nebraska. And so I thank Senator Brewer for his willingness to work out this compromise. I also want to thank Senator DeBoer for her passion and great work on this. She added a lot of value to the discussions, and we worked a long time on trying to find a number of different pieces of amendments and different types of language that might work, and it went back and forth a lot. Senator Brewer's staff was helpful on all of this as well. So again, here we have the situation where the enemy of good is perfection. And clearly, as with my bill previously this last week, you know, we aren't getting exactly what we all hope for and want. Our constituents aren't perfectly satisfied, but I do feel that Senator Brewer has moved the needle for his landowners, and I appreciate that and his passion and his determination that happened. And so I hope the landowners in his district are pleased and grateful for his determination and strong voice for them. And I also just want to say that the language that was added, the intent language, is also strong and important. It speaks to and acknowledges not only the landowners and the people, but it also acknowledges Nebraska's invaluable resources, including our history and the first people, the flora and fauna of Nebraska, the waters. So again, Senator Brewer has really worked to make something stronger. I do appreciate the people in this body that have agreed to stand down on extended debate because, and you know who you are, and I'm not going to go into that, but I do think that, again, it's not perfect for either side, and this is the same kind of work we're going to have to do on property taxes. The exact same thing is going to come up. It's not going to be perfect. And there's discussion of property taxes. There's discussion of income taxes. I don't hear a lot about the people on the margins, including those that would benefit under an increase of the earned income tax. So I'm going to start bringing that up too, because those are the people in my district that have a concern. And again, the enemy of good is perfection. I'll keep saying that. I just want to thank Senator Brewer and Senator DeBoer, Senator Brewer's staff, my staff, Senator DeBoer's staff. Again, we've found a good place. Is it perfect? No, but it's good, and Senator Brewer has moved the needle. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Pansy Brooks. Senator Clement, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. I stand in strong support of LB 155 and support AM 1380. I did make this my priority because last time this was discussed, it was just 2 votes short of passing on the first round, but there were 14 people not voting, and it was an important issue, and I felt it needed more discussion. My family, my parents' farm, was condemned last year for a 4-lane highway, Highway 30 west of Fremont, and now starting next year, a 160-acre farm with a pivot on it. It's going to have 4-lane road go through it, and very much disappointed that we're losing a lot of that farm ground, but it is for a public use. I didn't really like it. Our family settled with Department of Transportation without a lawsuit. We came to an agreement. But if that road went to serve a private business, we would have been shocked, and we would have fought it in court, I'm sure. And I think that eminent domain should be rarely used and should only be for a public purpose. And I would like to read a letter that I got, a very interesting letter from a man out west, Darren Blackstone, the county commissioner in Nuckolls County. I'll just read some of what he had to say. I'm writing in support of LB 155. It's past time to allow the taxpayers of Nebraska to have a say in what is allowed in our counties and on our lands that we own and cherish, and to be able to continue passing down to our children. Our zoning rules as well need to be updated, protecting us from overreaching companies who do not consider what damage is being done in our communities and on our land. We cannot afford the division of neighbors who have been friends for generations and now are becoming enemies because of the golden carrot being held in front of their noses. Agriculture is a tough occupation, but green energy is absolutely not the answer to the farmer's plight with the rules set forth so far. No other type of business exists where the owner of a business pays retail for their products like the farmer does and sells for wholesale. We need to get this fixed as soon as possible. I serve as one of 3 commissioners in our county, and I'm quite sure within another 2 to 5 years this state is going to be seeing problems like never before, as I see monthly what's going on in our county when we pay the bills. Rising health care costs, ever-increasing costs of living, incarceration costs, personal property taxes, etc., all need to be looked at sooner than later. We've got to get control of some of the insanity being shown nationwide with our elected officials. And he says, I hope you're successful in the passing of LB 155, Darren Blackstone, Commissioner of Nuckolls County. Again, eminent domain should be rarely used and should only be for public purpose, not for a private purpose. I urge a green vote for LB 155 and AM 1380, and I yield the rest of my time to Senator Brewer.
Senator Brewer, you're yielded 1 minute and 10 seconds.
Thank you, Senator Clements. And again, you gave us a chance to come back and work this again. I know how important the priority bill is, so we will forever be indebted to you for that. Now, coming back to the bill, I probably did not explain in enough detail the back and forth that did go on. Senator Pansy Brooks did a good job of that, where we did have 3 different versions we worked through. We found a path that let us come to the amendment that essentially will become the bill. And it is through that process that, I think the comments about if we can work through this, use that as a template to work through. I'm not sure property tax will be quite as easy as that one was, but it is where we need to go to help not just one district, but I think the property tax is going to be something that's across the board.
Time, Senator.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Clements and Senator Brewer. Speaker Scheer, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Colleagues and those watching on TV, I did want to note this morning, most of you may be noticed, but perhaps not, I did add 4 additional bills to the agenda this morning. And for those that are watching, if you'd like to write these down, LB 179, Senator Hilger's bill, LB 478, Senator Vargas's bill, LB 595, Senator Albright's bill, and LB 96, Senator Wayne's bill. Those were added to the agenda, and just wanted to make sure everybody had been noted, and those of my colleagues that perhaps hadn't noticed on the agenda were aware of it. Again, for those that were writing them down at home, LB 179, 478, 595, and 96. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Speaker Scheer. Senator Erdman, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good morning. Senator Brewer, I appreciate you bringing this bill. I have a story that I would like to share with you and those who are listening about eminent domain. I take you back to 1999. A person drove into my yard and said, I'm here from the railroad, and we are building a new line. And we're going to build this line from east of Baird to the top of what we call Angora Hill. And that line is going to go across your property. And we have authority to do that because we have the right of eminent domain. Well, I'd never heard much about eminent domain, never been exposed to it until that day. So the question I asked was, are you going to cross other people's properties as well? And they said yes. And I said, Are those people in agreement with you doing that? And he said that you'd have to take it up with your neighbors and find that out. So as time progressed, we had numerous meetings with the railroad on what they wanted to do. And we discovered that some of those meetings, we didn't get all the information. We got some of it, but we didn't get it all. And so we, as a group, and there was about 60 landowners affected, so about 35, 40 of us had decided that we weren't interested in doing this. And so we basically fought the eminent domain charge that they were trying to place on our land. I never realized that you could win and you could lose at the same time. And by that I mean we as a group bound together, and we hired a couple of very good attorneys to discover what it is they were trying to do to us and how we stop this. We spent thousands of dollars defending ourselves against the eminent domain rights of the railroad. In the end, we wind up winning, and by winning I mean they did not build the line, but we wound up losing also, because we spent thousands of dollars to prevent them from doing that, and we were not allowed to collect 1 red cent back for our lawyer fees or court costs or any of the other things. They were going to go right through the center of one of my center pivots, right through the middle. That was a little troublesome. They were going to go within 500 feet of my house. That was a problem. And so when the negotiations happened, I told them when they first started that I would let them sample my farm for $2,000. And they said, we don't pay for doing those kind of things. We have eminent domain rights. Well, as I visited with my neighbors, they paid some of my neighbors $500 to do the survey. So long story short, that drug out for over a year, and we never ever felt real comfortable that this was going to go away. But after about a year or so of dealing with the courts and the things that we did, and they appealed the decision that our local court made, and we did win. So Senator Brewer, when we deal with eminent domain, we have people trying to use eminent domain sometimes for more profit. And that is exactly what the railroad's trying to do. For you see, the hill they were trying to push their trains up was pretty steep, and they had to put pusher engines on the back of those trains. And so if they build a lane, a spur, that has a 2% grade up the hill, they could get by with the engines, the power that's on the train, and they wouldn't have to have the extra engines. They never once said that this was for use, for public use, but many times they said it makes them more efficient, which means more money. And so we need to make sure that, as Senator Clements was talking about eminent domain used for public use, we need to make sure, we need to be confident.
Time, Senator.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Erdman. Senator Albright would like to introduce 75 fourth graders and their teachers from Wayne Elementary in Wayne, Nebraska. They are seated in the south balcony. If you would please rise and be recognized by your Nebraska legislature. Returning to debate, Senator DeBoer, you're recognized.
Good morning, colleagues. I apologize. Some of you know I'm a little under the weather, so if my voice is a bit nasal, I'm sorry about that. I want to thank Senator Brewer and Senator Pansing Brooks for working with me on the amendment to this bill. A first-year senator could not ask for better people to learn from about negotiation and cooperation. So thank you very much to both of you. I don't like using eminent domain for private gain, But when we talk about public-private partnerships with renewable energy, it gives me some pause. There are some rare circumstances when eminent domain might be appropriate. As we all know, though, the legislative branch of government is not a particularly limber branch. We don't react quickly. We cannot really address particular situations in context. We work in musts and shall nots. But the world is not a one-size-fits-all, all-or-nothing place. That's why this amendment, which Senator Brewer and Senator Pansing Brooks put together, is so genius. It's flexible. This amendment says that any landowner can go to court, get their particular circumstances looked at, have their day in court, and the court can say whether the transmission lines serve a public purpose or do not. The judicial branch is much better situated to look at these individual circumstances than we are. I don't think we in this body should say always or never about something like eminent domain. When you talk about land, every piece of land is completely unique. It's not like a coffee cup, where typically you can substitute one for another. Land is not substitutable, so we must protect landowner interests. And we want to have a way also to be limber enough to accommodate public utilities and their use of eminent domain in those rare circumstances where it is appropriate. The courts should be the ultimate decision makers in those cases where the equities are not fully clear in the abstract. I therefore urge you all to vote green on the amendment and the underlying bill. Energy generation is an important part of our life together as Nebraskans, and so is protecting the property rights of our landowners against eminent domain. I believe this amendment is the best way to balance those interests. Thank you so much, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator DeBoer. Senator McAllister, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good morning again, colleagues. I would like to thank those people speaking on this bill for their comments this morning. First, I'd like to mention that Senator Brewer is absolutely correct. The Sand Hills are incredibly beautiful, unique in the country, and I think the intent language was rather moving. So I think that was a good addition to the bill from the amendment. I think that's a very good thing that we put together. Secondly, I was in fact the sponsor of LB 824. I would claim that we didn't do anything that wasn't permitted by the rules. Perhaps some of the activities were a little unusual, but certainly we followed the rules to do anything that we put together. We were prepared to do an extended debate on this particular bill, but we did come up with a compromise. And once again, I'd like to thank Senator Patty Pansing Brooks and Senator Wendy DeBoer for the work they did on this amendment, because I think we did come to a solution. Yes, we may not be singing Kumbaya, and that's not the nature of a compromise. Not everybody is perfectly happy, but we did come up with an acceptable arrangement, and I'm glad that we did that. I now would like to ask Senator Brewer a few questions just to put some information on the record. Will Senator Brewer yield?
Senator Brewer, would you yield?
I would.
Senator Brewer, currently the state and federal government require 52 government permit reviews. Is there anything in the bill that changes the requirements for the permits?
No, the requirements for permits as they are now would be the same. You're talking about the ones that are required by the other agencies in order to be able to construct? No, they would stay the same.
So that includes, U.S. Fish and Wildlife, the Nebraska state agencies, including the Nebraska Department of Revenue. And there's about 52 requirements that are required to do a wind development project. So is that correct?
I'll have to take your word on the number, but we're not changing that number of hurdles that they have to go through.
Correct. Well, thank you, Senator. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife and Nebraska Department of Environmental Quality, Game and Parks still require those same permits that they did. Is that correct, Senator?
That is correct.
Good. Applicable county regulations are still in effect as well?
Correct. You're subject to the county zoning, providing that county has zoning.
Fine. Senator, wind developers have no eminent domain authority, only utilities. Is that correct?
Correct. The public power for the public good, public use, is what has the right of eminent domain.
The big section of the bill that adds teeth to eminent domain is page 4 of the amendment, starting with line 8. Would you be so kind to read that section of the amendment?
All right, let's see, page 4, which line did you want me to start on?
Line 8, Senator.
Okay, line 8. Only a consumer-owned electric supplier operating in the state of Nebraska may exercise eminent domain authority to acquire the land rights necessary for the construction of transmission lines and related facilities. There is a rebuttable presumption that the exercise of eminent domain to provide needed transmission lines and related facilities for privately developed renewable energy generation facility is of or for public use.
Thank you, Senator. I'll come back on the mic because I have just a couple more comments. Thank you, Senator Brewer. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator McAllister and Senator Brewer. Senator Kavanaugh, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, or President, sorry. I wondered if Senator Brewer would be willing to yield for questions.
Senator Brewer, would you yield?
Yes.
First of all, thank you for working so hard on this bill. I am a big fan of the Sandhills. It is where I like to spend my vacation time with my children out in Hooker County, and it is a beautiful, untouched area, and so I appreciate your advocacy to keep it that way. I did want to ask a question about if you would consider, and not necessarily for today, but just broadly, maybe on select file, adding an amendment that would include this to, well, I'll just read you a sentence that I had thought about. Approval of a route does not authorize the use of eminent domain for construction or acquisition of pipelines. Would you consider adding something like that to this bill?
It would not be germane. The pipeline is, we're talking chapter 57 and chapter 70s.
Okay. Well, thank you for that. That was really just my question. So I appreciate the work you've done on this, and I will yield the remainder of my time to Senator McAllister if he wants to finish. Oh, okay. Senator Brewer, I'll yield my time to you. Thank you.
Senator Brewer, you're yielded 3 minutes and 30 seconds.
Well, I guess short of a closing, I don't have anything else, so I'll yield it back to the chair.
Thank you, Senator Brewer and Senator Kavanaugh. Senator Erdman, you're recognized.
Thank you again, Mr. Speaker. So where was I when my time ran out? Yeah, I didn't get any of my money back. That was it. But the point I want to make here on this eminent domain is, if you've not been exposed or been challenged with eminent domain, you probably don't understand the problem that causes. This was 1999. My sons were farming with me. It was a situation where it was going to divide our farm in the middle. We'd have had to make adjustments to where we crossed the rail. It was just going to be very, very difficult for us. And we spent a lot of time talking to the lawyers, trying to figure out how to do this. how to stop this and what the ramifications was if it goes through. And one of the reasons why we were very concerned is because, as far as I know, no one had ever beat the railroad when it come to eminent domain. And so when you have those things pending, you begin to wonder, is there a chance at all? Why are we spending this money if in the end we're going to lose? So I said that to say this: we may need to look at not only eminent domain in this instance, but we may need to re-examine the way we use eminent domain in other areas, because some of these things are promoted as being for public use, and they may not be. And that was one of the things that I was very, very surprised about. The railroad never tried to push the fact that this is for public use. And I think that may have been their demise. But I've had firsthand experience with eminent domain. I had some experience with eminent domain on the state right-of-way for highways. I understand that. I understand how that works. And generally speaking, as we dealt with people on eminent domain, the highway department, I was involved in several of those hearings, and I think the landowner got as much as they could on their end of it. Maybe Senator Clements would agree with that. It wasn't what we wanted, but by the same token, we did accomplish what we needed to do. But I'm in favor of 1380 and 155, and I encourage you to vote green as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Erdman. Senator Breezy, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good morning, colleagues. I rise in support of Senator Brewer's LB 155. The U.S. Constitution, the Nebraska Constitution, requires that a taking that we're talking about here be for a public use and requires a payment of just compensation. And it's well accepted the state has the ability to delegate the authority to even private individuals, private corporations, to exercise eminent domain, and I have a problem with that. And the state also may exercise eminent domain for the benefit of private individuals and corporations. I also have a problem with that, but there are policy reasons for allowing that to happen. The state has considerable latitude, more than I think we should, in determining what constitutes a public use, and that's what's happened here. We've determined legislatively that this is a public use. And this statute is essentially giving the state power to exercise eminent domain for the benefit of private parties. And some might suggest those subject to eminent domain are entitled to just compensation, so where's the harm? But that misses the point. You really should have the ability to control your own property. You shouldn't be forced into selling it or transferring the ability to control it. You shouldn't be forced to look at transmission lines on your property unless it truly is a public use. And what is a public use? It's generally considered to be something that benefits the entire public in general. And here, where it's to facilitate a privately developed renewable energy facility, I'm very reluctant to call that a public use. So I do support the bill here. We're talking about a statute really that benefits a small segment of private industry. AM 1380 truly is a compromise. It's a considerable concession, I would say, and I applaud everyone involved in that for working this out and to keep this thing moving along. And so I do support AM 1380 and LB 155. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Breezy. Senator McCollister, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Continuing a few questions for Senator Brewer, if he would yield.
Senator Brewer, would you yield?
I would.
Thank you, Senator Brewer. We were going through the verbiage or the amendment, and we read the operative amendment from line 8, and the mechanism that this whole that particular section of the bill relates to is called rebuttable presumption. Can you give me an idea of how that rebuttable presumption would work in the case of a landowner that was asked to agree to a line extension through their property and they would be unwilling to do so?
I'm going to make my best attempt at this, but you do understand I am not an attorney, and for the most part, I'm not a big fan of them. But what we're going to try and put this into a term that common people can understand, and that simply means that they before did not have an option if that right of eminent domain wanted to be used. With the rebuttable presumption, that does give them the ability to then use the courthouse to resolve questions that there might be about the use of right of eminent domain.
That's my understanding as well, and I would contend that's a good mechanism, as Senator DeBoer indicated, to resolve some of those differences. So I think that is a good solution. Well, I think it's the responsibility of legislative bodies or any political body to, conduct give and take on bills that come before that body. And I think this LB 155 is a good example of a good outcome that could have been a contentious bill. So I would thank you, your staff, Senator Patty Penzing Brooks and Senator DeBoer for their efforts in this regard, and I support AM 1380 and LB 155. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator McCollister and Senator Brewer. Senator Coulterman would like to introduce some special guests here today. Senator Coulterman's twin brother, Clark Coulterman, his sister-in-law, Linda Coulterman, and an exchange student, Monica Cabela from Chile, are all seated under the north balcony. Would you please rise and be recognized by your Nebraska legislature? Returning to debate, Senator Groney, you're recognized.
Thank you, President. I am going to reluctantly support AM 1380 and LB, really supported LB 155 in its original language. I just don't understand why these private companies will go out and negotiate a lease to put a windmill up there and pay them $8,000, $10,000 an acre. But then when they want their transfer line, that they don't have to go out and negotiate with those individual property owners and pay them $10,000 every quarter mile as a lease. So one individual who is burdened by the windmill gets paid every year. One individual who by eminent domain, their property is taken and the use of the property is taken, and they get nothing but a small payment from, I believe it would become from the Public Power District and not from the NPPD instead of the private company. And then I'm not sure if we get any taxes on that transfer line now, which is not for a public purpose. It's for a private company to sell their product into the grid. There's a lot of problems with this eminent domain situation that besides just, well, the big one in a free society to have rights to your property. I hope Senator Brewer brings more legislation into the future, and there's just a complete unfairness about this thing. So I got a power line of mine, land, I get no $10,000 lease payment from the private company, but if I put a windmill out there, I get a payment. And in both instances, the private company is profiting. I'm not as a taxpayer. I got plenty of energy. I got a Sutherland power plant that they're laying off people now because we have too much wind, too much alternative energy in the system, in the grid. But I understand we're saving the planet. So I was a huge proponent of LB 155. I do agree. You don't have to tell me the sandhills are beautiful. I know it. I have a place on the edge of it. Windmills are plain ugly. And You're sticking them in places they don't belong, and the people who own them live in Omaha and Denver and the urban areas, but they stick their windmills in our backyards, which we have huge backyards where I live, and they profit. This has nothing to do with saving the planet. It's about greed. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Groney. Senator Brandt, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. I've got a couple questions for Senator Brewer, if he would yield.
Senator Brewer, would you yield?
Yes.
Thank you, Senator Brewer. I'm new on the floor, and I've had the opportunity to sit next to Senator Chambers in the Judiciary Committee, and if there's one thing I learned from him, is he likes to get vagueness out of the bill. And the only question I've got for you is, on the first part of the bill, we talk about the sand hills. Do you have a hard definition of what the boundaries of the sand hills are?
Yes, there is a map that you can go and get from Natural Resources that defines the sand hills from corner to corner.
Okay, I guess would you be willing to put those boundaries into the bill for select file?
We'll figure out how we attach a map. I mean, I don't think we can put a latitude, longitude in for the corners of it, but we'll define the sand hills with the state-approved map that defines the sand hills.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, Senator Brandt and Senator Brewer. Senator McAllister, you're recognized, and this is your third opportunity.
Thank you, Mr. President. Just a few things to wrap up. Would Senator Clements yield to a question?
Senator Clements, would you yield?
Yes.
Senator Clements, you indicated that you have personal experience with easement issues with the state of Nebraska and a highway. Is that correct?
Yes.
What was the resolution of that? Were you compensated for the taking of your land?
Yes, there was negotiation between the Department of Transportation and my family, and my parents received compensation.
I understand. Thank you, Senator Clements. Senator Erdman, would you yield to a question?
Senator Erdman, would you yield?
Yes.
Senator Erdman, you indicated that you've had easement difficulties with a railroad. Is that correct?
That is true.
1999, as I recall you saying.
That's correct.
Did they use the power of eminent domain or threaten you with that eminent domain with the railroad issues that you spoke of?
They tried.
What was the resolution of that difficulty you had with the railroad?
The resolution, we stopped the rail from happening.
So there was no taking in that instance, is that correct?
In that instance, the only time I've ever heard the railroad losing.
But if they had been successful, they would have compensated you as well for the taking of your ground. Isn't that right?
It would have never been sufficient enough to make up for all the aggravation we'd have went through for years after that.
I understand. Thank you, Senator Erdman. The reason I bring this up is that utilities are loath to have conflicts with property owners. They'll do about anything to avoid those conflicts. And if it's unavoidable, they will actually pay you for that taking or that easement on your property. So there is usually just compensation in those instances. And nothing in LB 155 changes that particular situation. You have rights as a property owner, and we need to protect those rights, and you have absolutely every right to go to court and determine what a proper settlement is for a taking, so to speak. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator McAllister, Senator Clements, and Senator Erdman. Seeing no one in the queue, Senator Brewer, you're recognized to close on your amendment.
Thank you, Mr. President. We're going to try and real quickly wrap this up. Right now, the law says that a private wind energy company gets the special status of private use and the eminent domain power that comes with it. And this status cannot be questioned. Regardless of how you feel about wind energy, I would like to think that all of us would, at the very least, want to have our day in court before a private company has or can take our land. The people get to have this status under the compromise. There are a few things in this body where the difference that we have between senators' positions is farther apart than the issue of wind energy. AM 1380 is the longest legislative bridge that I have ever been a part of building. We have some tough issues coming up soon, as we have talked about issues such as property tax. But I think this amendment represents the kind of compromise that we're going to have in order to get things done. Again, I want to thank Senator Panzenbrooks and Senator DeBoer. They put their hearts into trying to come up with a solution, and because of that, we were able to have AM 1380. And with that, Mr. President, I would just simply ask for people's green votes on 1380 and on LB 155.
Thank you, Senator Brewer. The question is, shall the amendment to LB 155 be adopted? All those in favor, vote aye. Those opposed, vote nay. Have you all voted? Record, Mr. Clerk.
37 ayes, 1 nay, Mr. President, on the amendment.
The amendment is adopted. Seeing no one wanting to speak on LB 155, Senator Brewer, you're recognized to close. Senator Brewer waives closing. The question is the advancement of LB 155 to ear and R initial. All those in favor, vote aye. Those opposed, vote nay. Have all voted? Record, Mr. Clerk.
40 ayes, 1 nay, Mr. President, on the advancement of LB 155.
The bill advances. Mr. Clerk, for items.
Excuse me. Yes, thank you, Mr. President. Enrollment and review reports LB 538 and 323 to select file. And Senator McDonald, amendment to be printed to LB 641. That's all that I have, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. Returning to Senator priority bills, general file, LB 424.
Mr. President, 424 is a bill by Senator Quick and others. It's a bill for regulating municipalities. It transfers and changes provisions of the Nebraska Municipal Land Bank Act. It was introduced on January 18 of this year. At that time, referred to the Urban Affairs Committee, advanced to general file. There are committee amendments pending, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. Senator Quick, you're recognized to open on LB 424.
Thank you, Mr. President, and good morning, colleagues. Today I'm introducing LB 424, which would amend the Nebraska Municipal Land Bank Act. I'd like to thank Senator Stinner for making this his personal priority bill. It means a lot to have his support on this important issue, and I think it highlights how important this bill is for the entire state of Nebraska. LB 424 would allow any municipality in Nebraska to create or join a land bank. Current statute limits that potential only to municipalities located in Douglas or Sarpy County. Land banks are designed to solve a problem that our communities are struggling with. Communities have vacant, abandoned, tax-delinquent properties that the private sector has been unable to address. A land bank solves this problem by acquiring the property, clearing the title, and repurposing it in line with the priorities of the community, whether that is by selling the property to private developers or partnering with groups like Habitat for Humanity to create affordable housing. LB 424 is a result of 2 interim study hearings last summer, one in Grand Island and another in Ord. At these hearings, we heard from cities of all sizes about the need for land banks in their communities. The city of Ord came to testify they are running out of options to deal with their vacant and problem properties, and they need additional tools like land banks to address this widespread issue. LB 424 allows any municipality in the state to create a land bank. Cities of the metropolitan class, and with the committee amendment that Senator Hunt will speak to, cities of primary class can create a land bank independently. All other municipalities would be able to create a joint land bank with one way. So there are no hastily acquired properties. A land bank could use the automatically accepted bid process to acquire properties, but only if they meet a certain set of criteria and the board approves the process. After the land bank acquires a property, which it pays full price for, including taxes, it can clear the title and transfer the property to a private developer or nonprofit to redevelop it to the best interest of the community. When a land bank does sell the property, it may receive 50% of the property tax on the property for the first 5 years. This allows a land bank to receive a little bit of revenue to reinvest in their activities and keep them up and running. In my city of Grand Island, our planning department estimates that they have 197 vacant homes. The city of Grand Island views land banks as a cost savings to taxpayers, as they currently are spending tax dollars to address problem properties through code enforcement, law enforcement, legal issues, and maintenance. These are problems all of our communities across Nebraska are facing, and the expansion of land banks will address the issue of these problem properties. Land banks will revitalize neighborhoods, make safer neighborhoods, create jobs, provide affordable workforce housing, and cut costs to our communities, ultimately saving taxpayer dollars. Last summer, I spoke with the home builders in Grand Island about vacant and problem properties in our community, and I asked them if they currently purchase these properties or for renovation and resale. They addressed my question with this response: problem properties bring down property values in our neighborhoods, making a positive return on investment impossible. The cost to purchase, demolish, renovate, and the time and cost to clear title financially prevents us from taking on these properties. The builders in my community see land banks not as competition, but rather as a way for them to be part of the process. Land banks can acquire the property, clean and secure it, demolish it if necessary, clear the title, and sell the property to them or a nonprofit like Habitat for Humanity or a citizen wishing to renovate property for his or her own use. Habitat for Humanity in Grand Island needs properties as well and sees a land bank as a way to meet affordable housing needs for many low-income families. The Grand Island Area Habitat for Humanity wrote this quote: "A working and effective land bank would be another tool that could be utilized to return vacant, abandoned, and tax-delinquent properties into buildable lots for deserving families and that need decent, safe, and affordable houses." LB 424 contains a few changes from the previous legislation to ensure land banks best serve the public interest. It establishes procedures for removing land bank board members from office for neglect of duty or misconduct in order to ensure that board members are accountable to the public. LB 424 increases the number of factors that must be met before a land bank may submit an automatically accepted bid in the tax foreclosure sales to ensure that the automatically accepted bid process is only used when necessary. LB 424 requires the City Council or the Village Board of Trustees approve non-voting land bank board members to improve public input. It limits the amount of commercial property to which a land bank can hold legal title. It provides clear procedures for municipalities to join an existing land bank, and it clarifies that land banks do not have property tax levy authority. Land banks are an important tool that my community can utilize, and an important tool that all communities can utilize. It is the job of the legislature to remove barriers to growth in our communities and to empower our cities to provide families with opportunities to have decent, safe, and affordable homes. I urge your support of LB 424 so we can provide real, meaningful tools to our communities. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Quick. As the clerk stated, there are amendments from the Urban Affairs Committee. Senator Hunt, you are recognized to open on the committee amendments.
Thank you, Mr. President and members of the legislature. The committee amendment, AM 509, is a really simple short amendment that provides that a city of the primary class may create a land bank without having to form a joint land bank. So that would just include Lincoln, which is currently the only city of a primary class in Nebraska. Under the green copy of the bill, all land banks other than the one formed by a city of the metropolitan class were required to do joint land banks. So that just included Omaha. With AM 509, the cities of Omaha and Lincoln would be eligible to create a solo land bank, while all other municipalities would have to form joint land banks. So by including cities of the primary class, this just lets Lincoln do their own thing and do their own land bank just like Omaha does. And I would ask for your green vote to adopt AM 509. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Hunt. Beginning debate, Senator Hilgers, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good morning, colleagues. I rise in opposition to LB 424, but before I go into that in any depth, I do want to say, first, I appreciate Senator Quick's work on this particular bill. Appreciated his work on it last year. He and I have had a number of very positive conversations. And I'll be honest, if I just listened to his opening and I did no more work on the bill and didn't read the bill and didn't study the bill any further, I'd be hard-pressed to be, in all candor, to oppose it. Because what Senator Quick describes seems like a very reasonable, thoughtful tool, as he put it, to help municipalities deal with a specific problem. However, I don't think that's actually, the bill goes a lot further than that, and the Land Banks Act that we have instituted here in Nebraska goes much further than that. So let me just frame it this way. If first you don't think there's a problem at all that needs to be solved, don't vote for this bill. If you think that there might be a problem, but what you'd like to see is maybe a narrowly tailored solution to that problem, don't vote for this bill. If you think that there might be a solution for this problem, but you don't want to, you're a little uncomfortable that this entity that could be created or extended in your community may be able to privately develop property and have every income that's derived from that development be exempt from state and local taxes, don't vote for this bill. If you think that it might be wise to have a land bank in your community, but you're uncomfortable not having a guarantee that a member of your community will be on the board, if you're in Scottsbluff or North Platte or Kearney, that a member of your community may not be on this particular board voting on what properties to acquire, do not vote for this bill. If you're concerned about accountability, if you think that it's important for the members of the city council or governing board to be able to dissolve this without the veto power of the members of the board, don't vote for this bill. If you think that it's important to ensure that the members who are buying this property, developing property, working in the community in competition with the private sector be accountable and can be removed without cause or be accountable to citizens and voters of that community, don't vote for this bill. If you have any concern about conflicts of interest, and you think that it might not be a good idea to have individuals to be on a board generating potentially significant amount of money through private development, and then using those funds without any restriction to be able to invest in entities that they themselves own, do not vote for this bill. If you think that it might be problematic that in a tax sale, certificate sale, or in a foreclosure process where you have a private entity wanting to foreclose on a property, and they may have the world's greatest development plan, and they may they may want to spend twice as much as the land bank would spend. But you're concerned that the county has not one bit of discretion to choose that higher bid, and has to, under certain circumstances, automatically accept the bid of the land bank, don't vote for this bill. I understand what Senator Quick is trying to do. I understand the issue that this bill is trying to solve. Colleagues, read the 30-page bill, read the Land Bank Act, see the powers that we have given these unaccountable entities. Read about the expansion into our communities and what that will do. And if you think, and if you've read the papers over the last, every year, seemingly, there is an article, maybe a few every year, about some official somewhere without accountability who has access to taxpayer funds, who unfortunately abuses that access. Look no further to some of the issues we've seen in Omaha if you've read the World Herald, and the lack of accountability with the pension system and the investments that were made. It's incredibly important, colleagues, that we set up our structures to succeed.
1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. President. There is very little accountability in these structures. They have a tremendous amount of power. A tremendous amount of power. And I will go through in detail this particular act. We will talk about LB 424 and how we'll extend that act, and we'll go through it in detail because, colleagues, these land banks have incredible amount of power. And even though I think it's a problem that, even if I agree with Senator Quick that there's a problem to be solved, in my view, this is not the way to solve it. And I strongly oppose LB 424, and I look forward to the discussion. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Hilgers. Senator Stinner, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. It's wonderful to hear the opposition right off the bat. But I want to thank Senator Quick, certainly for bringing this bill and his dogged determination to try to craft an important, responsible document as it relates to rural Nebraska. Why did I prioritize this bill? Because I've talked to my constituents, I've talked to mayors, commissioners, and it always gets back to what do we do with all of these vacant and abandoned properties? And, oh, by the way, what are we going to do about affordable housing and workforce housing? So, why land bank? It's another tool for rural Nebraska, and I can tell you that rural Nebraska needs it worse than Omaha does. We've got plenty of property, great inventory for this. But I'll explain why. By definition, a land bank is a government entity or not-for-profit corporation that focuses on the conversion of vacant, abandoned, and tax-delinquent properties into productive use. They're not paying taxes. It's all outlined in the statute, definitively outlined. And I will then take you to a little checklist. Since Senator Hilgers wants to go through a checklist, I'll go through a checklist. And this checklist really is a center for community progress, and maybe if you open up your ears and open up your mind to this and understand what's going on in rural Nebraska, this might make sense to you. So when is the land bank the right tool? Population loss and high rates of vacancy and abandonment, check. Out-migration, we talk about it in planning. We talk about it all the time. Oh, by the way, in my part of the world, we have Cabela's that just left. Lots of out-migration, lots of problems, lots of stress. Weak economic conditions and property, little market value. That fits us. Inequitable, inefficient tax foreclosure and code liens. I asked my folks back home, I asked Gering, Scottsbluff, Mitchell, Morrill, why don't you clean up the properties yourself? You can foreclose it. We don't have the resources. They have tight budgets out there. Tight budgets mean they're not going to take taxpayer money and repurpose it into these types of housing or buildings or vacant buildings. They don't have the resources. And of course, sudden shocks. My goodness, we had Cabela's, I mentioned that. We've had a recession. We got a slowdown in our farming community. And oh, by the way, we just had a major flood. Now, FEMA and NEMA might be able to clean up some of this, but long term, I think some of these communities will need to have a land bank. And I will tell you this, that based on my knowledge of Western Nebraska, they put together a housing consortium. I think I talked about it in LB 496. That housing consortium
is moving forward, taking a look at the land bank as another tool that they can use for affordable and low-income housing, workforce housing, because what happens in these small towns? They're $10,000 properties that can be repurposed to $50,000, right around the hub of where Scottsbluff and Gering are, Sydney, whoever you want to pick. So there are opportunities there. There is a housing inventory. There is an absolute need. And I look at this legislation, and this legislature has taken on the task of workforce housing. They've taken it on. They've taken it on through 518. 518 was Senator Williams' bill. That's a matching grant for workforce housing. 496 gives a builder the opportunity to build new structures and actually price it according to the market. And now we have workforce housing that could possibly be a tool for the land bank. I would like to spend my time, and I will spend it on the mic, to dispel some of these arguments. The idea that we're competing against the private sector. Believe me, I've financed people who bought these tax certificates in bulk. They're looking for a 14% rate of return, folks. 14% rate of return. They're opportunists. They're investors, whatever, or speculators, whatever classification you want to put on them, they want 14% rate of return. How do you guarantee the 14% rate of return? You go around and you look at the properties. If it's vacant, the type of properties we're talking about, they won't even look at. Won't look at. The properties they look at, oh, there's somebody living there. I'm going to get taken out of this tax receipt. Or that the value of the property is higher than what I'm going to purchase. I don't have to invest any money. Seldom, and I have never seen this happen, somebody with a tax receipt forecloses that tax receipt, rehabilitates the project. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Stinner. Senator Lowe, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. I opposed this bill when it was voted out of committee, and I oppose this bill today. Quite frankly, I believe this bill gets far too much government involved into what should be a private sector or a not-for-profit sector process. I also have major reservations about the issue this bill could cause when it comes to property taxes in Nebraska. We just passed the ability for a county to impose a sales tax without a vote of the people, if the county is responsible for a federal judgment. The rationale given at the time was that this is necessary because the property owners in Gage County were paying taxes that were already too high. We also have a massive property tax bill that will soon be coming to the floor. That bill appears to have sales tax increase as well as eliminating some sales tax exemptions. Once again, the argument I have heard for this process is that our rural property owners are paying an unfair amount of taxes. We all know that there is a property tax crisis in the state. The legislature's actions for this session have consistently reflected the need to address this. But after all that, we now are attempting to expand land banks whose property will be tax exempt. We are worried about our property taxes, and yet we are trying to pass a bill where property is tax exempt. To me, this is contradictory to everything else we have heard on this floor since January. So those are the beginnings of my concerns and why I am opposed to this bill. Mr. President, I yield the rest of my time to Senator Hilgers.
Thank you, Senator Lowe. Senator Hilgers, you're yielded 2 minutes and 30 seconds.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Senator Lowe. Just briefly, I will say, Senator Stern mentioned that I wanted everyone to know I'd actually called up the president's desk. I knew Senator Stern had prioritized that. I did want to give him the opportunity to speak first as a matter of courtesy. I didn't think when I called up, he hadn't punched in. So, but I did. I told him that off the mic. I want to have a good debate today, and I know both sides will be able to be heard. I think let's start here. Let's start with what the language says of the bill itself and what the statute says, and you can find it in Chapter 19, 5201 through 5218 in your Nebraska revised statutes. This is what it says. Now, we can talk about saying what we want the land banks to do. We can talk about what we think it should do. We can talk about what we think the goals are, but what matters ultimately is what the statute says. And the statute does say, by the way, that the goal of the Land Bank Act is to help with vacant properties, dilapidated properties, etc. It's not what the statute ultimately says. The authority is much more broad than just the limited ability to be part of foreclosure sales. There's two pieces of authority that the Land Bank Act discussed. The first is the one that Senator Stinner discussed, the ability to go and be part of a foreclosure. This is what Senator Quick said as well, a tax certificate sale, and absolutely right. The land bank can get involved in those types of purchases, there's no doubt, in those types of auctions. And on another time on the mic, I'll talk about their automatically accepted bid that trumps any private developer of any kind. But the other thing is that land banks have the ability to acquire any property whatsoever. And I'll read the statutory language next time on the mic. They can acquire any property and they can develop it with a private party in any way. If we were talking about a Land Bank Act that actually was narrowly defined, this is what I said earlier, narrowly defined to the problem that's been framed for us, that's a different conversation. But the statute is not defined. The land bank can buy any property almost without restriction. They certainly can do the foreclosure. They can do the tax deeds. And they have certain powers and they have superpowers there. They can acquire any other property that they want. And I'll tell you that has significant implications when you look at that section with other sections of the Land Bank Act. I'm out of time now, but when we come back, we're going to talk about the implications on real property, income tax, private development, conflicts of interest, and all sorts of other things. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Hilgers and Senator Lowe. Senator Ben Hansen would like to recognize 24 fourth graders from the Oakland Craig Elementary School in Oakland, Nebraska. They are seated in the north balcony. Would you please stand and be recognized by your Nebraska legislature? Returning to debate, Senator Erdman, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. I appreciate the discussion so far. Senator Stinner has his linebacker voice up this morning. I've heard that a couple of times in appropriations, and I understand that when that happens, Senator Stinner is pretty concerned about what's going on. I understand that. Senator Stinner, I heard your comments about workforce housing shortage and those issues. In your city, in your community in Scottsbluff, and in the Panhandle, those people that I know that have rental properties have never experienced the vacancies they have now. And I can speak from experience. I have rental properties that I've never had problems keeping rented before. So I'm not overly concerned about there's a workforce housing shortage. We have a problem in agriculture, and we have now slipped into a depression. This bill is, I don't care what anyone says, is competing with private business, with those people who flip houses, those people that do that kind of work for a living. As was alluded to by Senator Lowe, they pay no taxes. And then when they sell the property, then they collect 50% of the property tax for 5 years. This board can be appointed by the mayor or the city manager, and they're not elected by anyone. This similar bill was here last year, and it didn't make it. And so we bring it back again. So there are several things that I think we need to listen to, and most of those were already brought up by Senator Hilgers, and he'll continue to talk about those. But this is the government competing against private business. And so if they go buy they buy a certificate at the tax sale, they're going to collect the 14%, just like everyone else does. And they pay no property tax. In a lot of these communities, there are properties that they could take over and try to refurbish under this guise of a land bank. But I don't know if there's anybody there to take over and rent those or buy those properties to live there. We're losing population. Senator Quick brought this bill back again thinking that he makes a few adjustments and it's going to make it to the finish line. I don't think so. At least I hope not. And then they made a provision, an amendment, to allow them to do it in Lincoln. And now it's a joint venture between cities. So I'll have some questions later when I speak again, but I would assume that one could have a land bank in, say, Kearney, and then Scotts Bluff could partner with them and have a land bank in Scotts Bluff. Or maybe Scotts Bluff could partner with Lincoln. This is an issue that I think needs to be dealt with in a different way than giving government more authority to buy more land to take off the tax rolls. And in those communities, and I looked up the one in St. Louis, they have a significant portion of their properties owned by land banks. And the last article I read said if you'll come there and mow the weeds, they'll give it to you. And so at some point in time, you reach the point of saturation, how many properties can the land bank own? And this bill amends those as well as to how many properties you can own. So I in no way intend to vote for either one of these, 509 or 424. And I have numerous questions about some of the issues in the bill, and I'll take those up later on my next shot. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Erdman. Senator LaGrone, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Would Senator Quick yield to a question?
Senator Quick, would you yield?
Yes, I will.
Senator Quick, I was just looking through the bill on page 8 into 9. I was wondering if you can talk to me about what an automatic bid is.
Okay, the automatic bid process is where, so you have a property that comes up on tax foreclosure, and I can read through what the statute says if that.
Well, I can see the statute. My question is, my understanding of an automatic bid, I'll just ask it this way. Correct me if I'm wrong here, because that's what I'm trying to figure out, is essentially a land bank could make a bid on a property and they would automatically win that bid over another private developer. Is that correct?
They could. It has to meet the criteria.
Assuming it meets the criteria, though.
And it has to pass by the board, too. The board has to approve that.
Okay, thank you. Mr. President, I'm opposed to this bill, one, because it's creating another level of government, but two, if the goal is to deal with properties that private entities can't deal with, then the automatic bid provision entirely defeats that purpose. We're having a government entity automatically get to beat out a private entity under a bill that's supposedly being passed to deal with properties that private entities can't deal with. To me, that really goes and undercuts the entire purpose of the bill. I know Senator Hilgers has a lot more to say on that topic, as he mentioned previously, so we can go a little more in depth on that. I'll yield the remainder of my time to Senator Hilgers.
Thank you, Senator LaGrone. Senator Hilgers, you're yielded 3 minutes and 15 seconds.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you, Senator LaGrone. I want to pick up where I left off before, which is just going through the language of the statute. Again, this is not, I understand as framed the solution, I understand, or as framed the problem and the purported solution, but I got to tell you, colleagues, when you go through the language, it does that, but it does a whole lot more. So the first thing that the statute provides, the bill provides, and this is an extension of the Land Bank Act, is that, as I mentioned, and this is in 1952-08, the land bank can acquire property. So it's not limited it's not limited in any way, in any shape or form. So if you think that the land bank's there because we want to have it narrowly tailored to just these really problematic properties, put that out of your mind, because that may be the intent of those supporting LB 424. That is in no way what the statute says, first. Now, what can they do with that property? Well, the statute also says in 5207 that the land bank can develop that property with third parties. Private third parties. So land bank can acquire any property. I'm not talking about just foreclosures. Land bank can acquire any property. And by the way, we'll talk separately about the cap. The land bank can have up to 7% of the entire municipality's land under its ownership. So the land bank can acquire any property it wants with very few limitations. It can then go and develop that property. Thank you, Mr. President. It could go develop that property with a third party, derive income from that, whatever the development is. That income is not then taxed. And they can do all sorts of things with that income, one of which is invest in securities that could or could not, it does not matter. There's nothing in the statute that says one way or the other that restricts them. That could themselves be, that it could be invested in investments that are owned by members of the board. So first and foremost, that just keep in your mind as we go through this, the powers of the land bank are far more broad than the narrow solution or problem that we've described here.
1 minute.
They can acquire property, any property, and they can develop that property, and the income they generate off that property is tax-free. Now, when you combine that structure with a system that is incredibly unaccountable, and I'll talk about this maybe next time on the mic, that with individuals who almost cannot be removed, almost for any reason, they can be removed under certain circumstances to be sure, but they aren't under terms of years. They certainly aren't accountable. They can't be fired at will. They cannot be removed by the voters of a particular municipality. And in the case of this expansion of 424, they don't even have to live in that municipality. They could live in Omaha. If you're in North Platte, they could live in Omaha. When you have that kind of accountability structure with the very loose conflict of interest laws, you're setting up a system that might work in some instances, but it ain't going to work in other instances. And I think it's a bad system with a bad structure, and I'll talk more about it next time on the mic. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Hilgers and Senator Legrone. Mr. Clerk, for items.
Just an announcement, Mr. President. The Appropriations Committee and Transportation Committee will have an executive session in the Warner Chamber at noon today. Mr. President, Senator Bowles would move to recess the body until 1:30 p.m.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. Members, we have a number of people in the queue. When we come back from recess, we will continue the queue as they are. We have a motion to recess until 1:30. All those in favor say aye. Opposed say nay. We are in recess.